All right, it is 5 o'clock, and I am going to get us started here. So let me share my screen. Good evening, everybody. I'm sure more will arrive. Let me go ahead and share my screen, show our slides. Really excited for you all to be here tonight, and I have just a few quick words I'll share, and then I will introduce our guests. So thank you again so much for being here. All right, so we are going to have a comprehensive conversation about adolescent literacy tonight. And I'm using the word comprehensive here because we have an opportunity to hear from three very unique panelists who are going to bring three very unique angles to this discussion on adolescent literacy. And I will, like I said, I'll be introducing them in just a moment here. But first, um, let me say a couple of things really quickly, and I'll move this slide forward, put that question up here. That's our guiding question for tonight. And I'm just going to let it sit there for a minute. All right. So, if any of you are working in the field of education and literacy, which I'm sure many of you are, you probably have a sense of the gravity of the times that we're living in. And in the last few years, I myself have definitely seen what I would call a precipitous decline in grade level reading in schools, which was always and has been an issue for a very long time, but it seems to have suddenly accelerated and broadened. And I see this regularly in my work as a clinical supervisor and as a consultant. So, I'm tempted at times to use the word crisis when I see this, but I really want us to think in terms of assets rather than deficits. And I'm hoping our dialogue tonight will center on literacy opportunities for adolescents, hence the title of the webinar. Um, that being said, the challenges are real and pervasive and are now complicated by the emergence of artificial intelligence. Students who are struggling with reading in middle and high school face compounding consequences across every content area that requires reading to learn, which would be most of them. These challenges are particularly acute for students with learning differences, those still learning English, and neurodivergent learners. And it has been my experience that struggling readers often give up and check out around middle school, around that age. In response, New York City Public Schools has been taking a bold step over the last couple of years, initiating a variety of science of reading approaches across the districts. And I've had the privilege to see it in action, working alongside teachers who are striving to ensure that each one of their students is able to decode for comprehension. The purpose of explicit instruction is, of course, being to ensure that meaning making from reading happens, and students aren't just simply decoding without understanding. And so that's really the framing for tonight's discussion. I want to pause for just a second and digress briefly and note that Readable English is currently partnering with Columbia University's Center for Public Research and Leadership, and they are running a pilot that is focused on family engagement in adolescent literacy interventions. And so as part of that initiative, Readable English is seeking schools and other education programs, such as community-based organizations, to partner with as sites for our fully funded 12-week trial of the Readable English decoding tool. If you're interested in participating in that or finding out more about it, I will reference it again at the end of the webinar tonight. But I just wanted to put that out there before we get too far down the road. And now, turning back to the discussion, the central question you see there on the screen: how do we most effectively bridge the decoding fluency gap to grade level comprehension? That's what we are going to really dive into. And I would like to first introduce our panel. So I have the pleasure of presenting Aaden Stern, who is the Deputy Superintendent for Bronx Districts 8, 10, and 11 in New York City Public Schools. And Aaden oversees many aspects of the science of reading implementation across the schools that he serves. He brings a systems level view to our conversation tonight, with a focus on the perspectives needed to make real change at scale. So a broad perspective. Excited to hear about that. Next, it's my honor to introduce Marianne McCarthy-Campell, co-founder and director of the New Horizons School and Learning Center in Santa Rosa, California. Her decades of work in special ed and adult education provide her with deep insight on the social emotional impact on students who have atypical learning needs. And rounding out our panel, Christina Cover is a literacy specialist and ELA teacher at Bronxwood Prep Academy in the Bronx, where she supports learners who are both at and below grade level. And she does this by employing a variety of approaches that include Readable English, our decoding and fluency tool that provides a phonetic and orthographic scaffold that is rooted in the Orton-Gillingham tradition. So tonight, our panelists are going to explore three questions, addressing, first, what makes interventions effective? And secondly, how students can best operate at grade level while building foundational skills at the same time. And thirdly, how decoding and fluency interventions can serve as genuine gateways to comprehension. And so let's get started. I will present each question in turn, and the panelists will address it, and then we will have a Q&A after that. So the first question that we present tonight for our panelists is, what specific challenges face multilingual and neurodivergent learners and struggling readers? And what does effective intervention look like for them? And we can just open that conversation up. Any one of our three panels can start us off, and let's let the conversation begin. Thank you again so much.
Well,
Marianne?
Iain, I feel like I'm probably the elder, so maybe I'll start.
Great.
Um, um, this is such a good question. I guess I will bring the perspective to the table of working with middle schoolers and high schoolers for the last 50 years um, um, in in private settings, but also on a junior college level. I've worked for probably 40 years. And I think the thing that to me is um, so important to discuss on this level is making sure that we're understanding, and I hate using this word anymore because it's overused or understood, the word trauma that comes with years of failure in a public school setting or a private school setting that isn't geared to working with students with dyslexia or dysgraphia or dyscalculia for that matter, the neurodivergent students and those that have just not learn to read, but don't necessarily carry those issues. I think one of the most important things that I've learned over these years is the need to start where kids are, and to make sure that we're not expecting that they can work at or learn at a certain level or pace that others can. And that we really look at their challenges and also their gifts very carefully in designing a program that will meet their really individual needs, so that they can make some progress. I think we also have to recognize that, beyond the trauma and anxiety, that working one-on-one with students is essential in my mind, if they're many years behind in learning to read, because a lot of them won't speak up, they won't read, they're embarrassed, and they fall back into that energy field that's so difficult for them to be able to process information because of all of the anxiety that they're feeling, and the thought of peer rejection again, and so that area is very important for me to just put out there as that's to me is the bottom layer, the very basics, is working individually, finding out where kids are. The kids that are multilingual certainly have issues with vocabulary, and those issues need to be worked on very carefully, and just so they have a level playing field and that they can have a kind of an understanding of and a basic general knowledge that we would assume students have, but they don't. Um, and then, always looking at what are their strengths? Are they more visual learners or auditory learners? Are we teaching them in a way that we teach because that's the way we learn, or are we able to cross over that boundary and begin to teach them in the way that they can learn? So those are just the beginnings of the challenges that I work with every day. Um, so start
That's
there.
great. Yeah,
And
thank you for that.
I,
That's wonderful. I would love to hear what Aaden has to say about how that relates to the school-wide implementation aspect of things.
Yeah, well, and thank you, Marianne, for jumping in. I would build off of that. I think that the cultural piece that you talked about is really, really important. Iain, as you framed like the larger conversation about like effectively bridging the gap to grade level comprehension, I was struck that it didn't say reading comprehension in there. And I actually think that there's something in when teachers know that students can't read, they sometimes think that students can't think and that
Yes.
there's more time I think that we'll talk about this, but one of the inherent tensions here is how do you create a space that is safe enough for a 15-year-old or a 16 or a 17-year-old to be learning phonics out loud with their peers, which is necessary 100%, and I see it across our schools, but also to have their core content teachers not expect that just because they cannot read complex words doesn't mean that they cannot have complex thoughts. And so there's actually like a problem on both ends of this where we need to meet students where they are in terms of their literacy needs because that's real, but also provide them access to like grade level content and like questions that they can understand and think about so that their core English classes don't just become, I've provided you all of these scaffolds so you can take a sentence starter and take a sentence ender and copy some text in the middle, and we all pat ourselves on the back because we think you learned how to write a paragraph. And so it's really complex, both in terms of meeting students where they are in terms of literacy, but also honoring the fact that whether or not you know how to read does not mean that you cannot think deeply and understand complicated concepts. Um,
Mhm.
and so I think that some of that speaks to like school culture, teacher beliefs in that area. And Iain, like we were talking about just in preparation for this, like the beliefs of a school principal and a school leader, especially in high school, when the incentives for us are around graduation rate, period, right? Regents exams in New York, graduation rate, and reading intervention is not a credit bearing class, right? And teachers think kids need to prepare for and prep for Regents exams. So there's all of this test prep stuff that happens that is dealing with the symptom of students can't do well on tests. And until we can really, and I want to say that I really see a shift happening, certainly in our district, and Christina can talk to her work at her school, in our district and in New York City, to recognize that getting a 65 on the Regents exam is not actually the thing that kids need. Kids need to learn to be successful. They need to learn to read so they can be successful, so they can do broader things. And school leaders need to shift programming and accept the trade-offs of a kid might not be able to take X class ninth grade because they need that reading class. And the beliefs of the administrators and the programmers and what they allow kids access to are also fundamentally important to try to build capacity and understanding around so we can start to tackle this in our schools.
Yeah, thank you for that. I've had so many conversations with teachers about the regions, and it's so overwhelming for so many teachers to detach themselves from that test focus. That's a conversation I've had many, many times. And I always make the point that if they can't read, they're not going to be able to do well on the test. So what's the priority around that? And it's tough for a lot of teachers to break that fixation with it. Speaking about teachers, I would love to hear to round this question off hear from Christina about what you're experiencing at the ground level in the classroom along the lines of what we're discussing here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And it's such a joy to be here with you, Marianne, and also with you, Deputy Stern. Thank you so, so much, both of you, for your literacy leadership. I completely agree with everything that's already been shared. And particularly for secondary readers, we see this compounding of challenges that students have faced academically for many years, and teachers at the secondary level who often understandably feel that it is not their job or not their responsibility to be the ones to make up this gap. And so there is such a tension among secondary teachers as they try to find ways to address the challenges that students face. And so to what Marianne shared, that social emotional piece, I know Zaretta Hammond talks in culture responsive teaching in the brain, like around like amygdala hijack and just how students really get anxious. There are a lot of avoidant behaviors that I see every day in the classroom, when it's time to read, getting up to go to the bathroom or, anything and everything but the task at hand. And I think some teachers, if they're not understanding of the literacy crisis, they may think that the student's just being disruptive, but they might have built up these avoidant behaviors to get out of the very tasks that they're afraid to perform in front of other students because they know they struggle. And so I think those are really unique challenges for multilingual neurodivergent secondary readers. And one other thing I'll throw in is the knowledge gap. And just because so many students had struggled to decode for so long, not only are they facing a decoding challenge, but all the knowledge that they should have built up in elementary school and middle school, they might not have the same access to. And so it's a big hurdle to climb. But I'll say, just like Deputy Stern said, there are some great strides being made in New York City and across the country. And so I've really enjoyed working with rewards, working with Phonics for Reading, Starry. There are a lot of great comprehensive programs. And, here, as this is a Readable English panel, I've really enjoyed Readable English as a supplementary tool that is unique in that it provides students with a way to immediately engage with grade level text by providing those glyphs. And some kids have really caught on to it and enjoy it. And as the glyphs are removed, they're still finding themselves accessing the grade level text. So it's been a really interesting approach. And I think any secondary educator in the science of reading space knows, it's time to try anything and everything. And some approaches work better than others. Some are more engaging and interesting than others. So it certainly is important to refer to the science, but also to be innovative. And I think Readable English is one example of a resource that has been an interesting approach alongside rewards, Phonics for Reading, and other really solid evidence-based programs too. So those are a couple of things that I'll share as we kick off the conversation.
Beautiful.
If I
Thanks so
hit,
much.
Ian,
Yeah.
could I just add, because as Christina, as you were talking, and I think you're right, and those avoidant behaviors are something that are like they're often students who are referred for special education, and there's a position in New York City public schools that was the IEP teacher, that's the centrally funded intervention teacher, who's meant to be the space between. It is what we're seeing presented, a student who needs an IEP because they have other health impairment, emotional disturbance, learning disability, or is it a reading issue? And so there's a position that exists that I think we need to make better leverage of across the system, because those avoidant behaviors turn up and we misunderstand them. But I also think it's important to name that there are adaptive behaviors that kids have. Like kids don't get to high school illiterate without having figured out how to game the system, right? And kids are smart, so they
Mhm.
know how to play the game of school. And so while they are like, walking out or doing something so that you don't make them read out loud, they're also figuring out how to turn in just enough work so that they pass, so they make it to the next grade. And Ian, about testing, illiterate people have figured out how to pass Regents exams since 1866.
Mhm.
It's fact,
Yeah, I'm
right?
glad you bring that up. There's a lot of history about, we fret and we worry about illiteracy, but historically, being illiterate requires a great deal of intelligence and social savvy.
Yeah.
And you know, my experience and things I've read about too historically is illiterate people have a much better short-term memory. They're able to multitask in ways that literate people can't because they don't have the crutch of being able to read something back. So there's a lot of history around that. I could digress the whole meeting on that alone, but I won't. Uh, but yeah, absolutely. And everything you're saying, I've seen, and in any number of ways. But let me switch us off to move us off to the next question and develop this conversation in a little bit of a different direction here, going back to the grade level issue. Second question is, how do we ensure that high need adolescent readers can access grade level content across all subjects while they're at the same time building foundational skills? And that may be happening to a greater or lesser degree, depending on the given situation. But just how do you manage that tension of a student needing this remediation and yet trying to keep them positioned with their peers, with their grade level content to the greatest degree possible? That's always a very difficult challenge. I'd love to hear. Well, let's start with this time. Let's start with Marianne and have her share, and then we'll just keep the same pattern going here. Marianne, Aaden, and Christina.
They may know more than I do. But I think what's really clear to me is that most of the students that I've worked with dyslexia um, are exceptionally bright. And to hold them back into just, the remediation, which, in California, we've been working really hard to convince the folks in the state of California that dyslexia actually exists. And it's just become law recently that they acknowledge that dyslexia exists, which is interesting and painful. But what I would say is, the clear reality is that the teaching on a variety of levels is very important. So with every spot of the remediation that's so essential so that they can get through the decoding issue is making sure that their brains and their minds and their spirits are challenged. And so, initially, things like, peer support and, bridging gaps with using technology, which certainly is very helpful, more helpful daily as they develop more tools in that area, so that text to reading, read to text, all of that kind of support, the Grammarly and all of that stuff that they're developing is really important so that they can also demonstrate what they know. But the other thing too is to remember that classrooms don't also always have to be about writing a 7-page paper and doing things in the standard ways that we did way back when, or even last week. That there are other ways for students to communicate what they know. And we can go back to the Socratic methods and all that from way back when, and recognize that there are many ways for people to learn, and so not to stay within necessarily the structures, and always understanding that there's got to be multi-levels, that you never keep a student at the point of where they are decoding, maybe at a first, second, or third grade level when they're in 11th grade, but rather to make sure that their minds are expanding, their experiences, their hands-on learning is happening, and so that there's that joy of learning that makes them want to actually pull themselves up and be willing to do the harder work of the decoding too. So I think that's, those things are really important to me. I have a number of my students over the years that have attended the junior college, for example, and have taken math courses and gone through all of the math series at a junior college before they graduated from high school because of their capabilities, far more capable than our most capable math teachers, and could work at that pace and level. And at the same time, back here at our school, we're working on things like decoding, but also in discussions and, reading novels in a variety of different ways besides just decoding them, so that they're experiencing the depth of the material and using their intellect. So all of that's so important.
Marianne, as you're talking, I'm wondering like what education is like in Florida, where kids are writing the 7-page paper, because in New York it's the 5-paragraph essay, and I
I'm
and I
sorry.
wonder, no, no, it's fine. The 7-page paper would be better than the 5-paragraph essay, but
Yeah.
when is the last time anyone here had to produce the 5-paragraph essay or the 7-page paper for any legitimate purpose other than serving the education machine? And I
Right.
think like you name that as, and I want to echo that as like the things that we ask of our students don't actually reflect the things that students need to be able to do to be successful. I think we don't value often enough the skill sets and the ways that people can show what they're learning outside of these like narrow little boxes. And so like I just really want to echo that. I also appreciate that you name math, and this is about reading. But I would say that an unfortunate asset that we have in the work to try to get people to understand, we all, even in secondary education, especially in high school, especially in districts like New York City, we need to all be reading teachers. Is that there isn't like an endemic phobia of words, like there is an endemic phobia of numbers in society. And so I think like panel for a different time, but like math is the punchline of jokes, but people don't show up and say like, well, I don't read. Reading's hard. Like that's a thing we generally accept people need to do, but it's okay for people to say like, I never got past middle school math. And so I think like you naming those things really speaks to me. In terms of the question, Iain, like I think it connects to leadership again, like school leaders, whether it's district leaders, if you're in a small district where like superintendents have control over what happens, or if you're in a large district where principals are really empowered, like New York City, the leadership to be able to shift programming so that you can have, we do like win periods or it's strategic reading programs where you use data about where students are, you use screeners to and diagnostics to say these students need this, and I'm going to program them into the classes like Christina was talking about. These students need phonics instruction, so fifth period they get phonics instruction, but the students who need fluency, they're going to go to STARI. And we can flexibly move students throughout a continuum of support rather than approaching it as like we're tiering students like we've done for so long. Kids are not a tier one, tier two, level one, level two. We need to tier ourselves and our interventions that we provide to them. To your point, Marianne, about being flexible. A kid should not be locked into non-readership in your school. And so there's a leadership decision about a program that's flexible enough so a student can move at their own pace through different interventions and then get in, and also remaining in core content areas without having to be pulled out for the reading support. In terms of across subject areas, again, it's a leadership decision about how principals build capacity, build mindset, and identify specific things that they want to see that are evidence-based, about how math, science, history, and English teachers can teach vocabulary. And it's not just about teaching a kid an individual word, but it's about teaching kid the schema and the skill set to be able to make sense of complicated vocabulary. That when students are being taught writing strategies, it's not like, you have to use CER or ICE or what is it? CEEI, CICE, right? CICE. It's not about the strategy. It's that these are things that are repeatedly used to help students build an internal skill so they can say, oh, I'm approached with a novel thing. I have skills that I can use to tackle this problem. And so I think all of those things need to work in concert. And it's really hard when teachers work on islands separate from one another, when teachers develop their own curriculum, and there isn't, and with respect for how hard teachers work, if you haven't been trained in curriculum development, you shouldn't be writing your own English curriculum. It's not, I don't think it's appropriate. Um, and when school leaders allow like all of the autonomy across classes, Teachers essentially make up how they want to do things. And a young person's experience is 6 periods of 6 different teachers making up 6 different ways to teach them something. And if you go back to think about what that's like for a neurodivergent student, for an English language learner, the cognitive load of figuring out what do you want me to do when you say analyze? If it means 6 different things, I'm never going to successfully do it. So it really requires leadership to build collective efficacy around it. And it's hard. It is really, really hard to do in any school context.
Yeah, absolutely. I know before I switch to Christina, I just want to share that last school year, I had an opportunity to go to a number of PDs at like 4 or 5 different schools in the DOE in New York City public schools, where they were having very successful outcomes with their Science of Reading initiative. And in each case, in each of those schools, what really made that a successful programming intervention for the students was the collaborative nature of it, that all the teachers were working together very closely to make the programming work and to adapt it to the students that they particularly served. And yeah, to your point, Aaden, about teachers working in their own silos within their own buildings, it's critical that teachers work collaboratively. And where you see success is where you see teacher collaboration. That's been my experience. So, yeah. But Christina, go ahead and respond, and I'll stop taking everybody's time.
No, totally, completely agree on the importance of teacher collaboration. Building that capacity and efficacy at the secondary level is where we all strive to go. And I think, to speak further to what you mentioned, Deputy Stern, around instructional materials and curriculum, I think that
ChatGPT, why am I
districts
supposed to quit?
and schools, oh, we've got someone here joining. Thank you for being here. We've got districts and schools who are doing a really great job of selecting high quality instructional materials. And I think that that's another avenue to building capacity. No worries. Building capacity and opportunities for folks to access grade level content while building foundational skills. I recognize I'm a younger teacher. I'm a fourth-year teacher. So I'm, easily persuaded, I guess, the things I'm seeing, but I quite like the HMH into literature curriculum, at least for the ninth grade, because I feel that it's a rich curriculum with podcasts, video, audio, interesting text, interesting units that build knowledge and build background knowledge, and with scaffolds built in for English learners and students with disabilities. I'm not being paid by HMH to make that shout out there, but I do quite like that curriculum because I feel that for students who are maybe struggling to decode and access the text, there are podcasts or videos that align. There are peer coach videos and other ways that students can get an opportunity to access the content, because we often see that students with poor or struggling decoding skills might have high language comprehension skills, to your point, Deputy Stern, that have been strengthened because of their reliance on their listening comprehension over the years. So, excellent listeners, excellent speakers, but struggle with reading. We definitely want to make sure that we're acknowledging the strengths that they bring to the classroom too, as we give them opportunities to engage in interesting conversations. I'll also mention, curriculums not curriculums, but like the Hockman method, writing approaches that allow you to, look at any content or any subject and build those foundational skills through your instruction. I'm a big fan of that. I think that's another way. Going back to Readable English, I think that's another interesting way for students to be able to add glyphs to worksheets that they have or readings and be able to use the glyphs. And it's really interesting to see some students picking up on that and then being able to, remove them and still see that their sight word knowledge has increased. And it's really, really cool. And so, yeah, I think there are a lot of different things that can be done. And it all comes down to, just like Deputy Stern said, that cohesion within the school building and being really strategic about what levers to pull to ensure everyone gets to engage in grade level content, no matter what foundational skills they have.
Hey, Christina, sorry, I feel like I have something to add to everything. But like the Hockman strategies, the writing revolution strategies, I see a lot of schools doing that. And I think there's like a lot of power in that because it's a system that you can apply across content areas. And it's not just like people making a thing up Like I thought I would do this today, or my unit is about this. The system into which students are being trained so that they are internalizing these skills is immensely helpful for them. But I think
Mm.
that I'd add that there's the caution on the other end of it that I see, where sometimes the strategy becomes the goal, and the goal is not the goal. Sometimes, like, I've been to schools where kids are getting graded on their like kernel expansion Hockman writing because they're not doing the format right, but they can read and write just fine. Like they're reading on a college level, they're writing fine, but they're not doing the Hockman strategy right. Or their kid today told me, like, I'm getting graded on doing 9 annotations on this worksheet. I don't need 9 annotations because I understand it. So can't you just judge me based on how I demonstrate I know it? And so there's the
Mhm.
pitfall that we run into where sometimes the scaffold becomes the goal in and of itself. And then we're not helping students access grade level content. We're grading them on how well they participate in school and fill in our worksheets and not how they demonstrate their learning. And so, like, excuse me. And you want to talk about opportunities, Iain. Within all these opportunities, unfortunately, there are pitfalls like, and I'm not familiar with Readable specifically, like, might be great. Don't start grading students on whether they're putting glyphs on a thing. It's not the point. But we fall into that in schools because we need to produce grades for kids so we can rank and sort them.
That's a
Yeah,
great point.
very, a very, very good point. It's the
Amen,
eternal,
Aiden.
yeah, it's the eternal battle between teacher-centric versus student-centric. And there's so many examples of teachers thinking they're being student-centric when they're in fact they're really serving their own ability to get paperwork processed more effectively at the expense of actually learning. And it's a trap we can all fall into. So I don't want to put that out there like I'm like a derisive point, but it's very easy to serve your own facility at the expense of others learning. Yeah. So very, very well, good point. All right, we are doing pretty well here. Let me move us on to this third question for tonight. And that third and final question before we have the Q&A. And this is the gateway question. And essentially, how can accelerated decoding and fluency development serve as a true gateway to comprehension rather than as a one-off or discrete remediation? And I think we have a nice rhythm going here. So I will start with Marianne, go to Aaden, go to Christina. So,
Okay. I like this question because again, it's, are we trying to teach discrete skill building, or are we trying to get beyond it so that that falls away? And the whole point of reading is to have comprehension and relationship with whatever the materials are, or what the content is and how that relates to us in some way. And so to me, the most important thing that, as I was thinking about this is how important it is that I spend time, or I acknowledge with the students not only, their decoding success, but also to really spend time asking them questions about what they're reading and what they think the information means, and conceptually, but also for them to begin to ask their own questions. What did I just read? What did it mean to me? How does that relate to something that I've experienced before, or something that I want to know more about? And so a lot of relationship building between the decoding and fluency part of things, then actually being just another part of the real thing that we want, which is the comprehension. And so that inquisitiveness, asking questions, relating it, all of that is, to me, the most important thing that we can do. We've seen that in a lot of programs over the years. If you just, when we, just started Orton Gillingham, or for those of you that know a variety of other systems, that the discrete skill is taught and may be learned because they had to learn it to mastery before they could move on. But the reality is that the comprehension was never there, and so the interest is never there. So, trying to make sure that we're teaching kids how to ask questions, but inviting them to actually do it in their own way from their own experiences, because we're going to learn more about what the questions might be and what relevance it is for them. So really trying to engage them in the material on a different level, even as we're doing the decoding, is really important, I think. And Aaden, I'd like you to run for the um, the lead for the Department of Education of California. It's going to be an open soon.
The whole state.
God bless you. We need you there.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I'm like put my name in the hat. Tell Governor Newsom that I
Yeah.
will happily take his call
Yeah.
and see what opportunities there are. Thank you.
Your voice
Very
would be, your voice is very welcome. I'm telling you.
I'm flattered, and all of the other thoughts I had just um, uh, two
Sorry.
things. No,
Sorry.
it's it's embarrassing to be complimented in front of other people, but I appreciate it all the same. Two things that come to mind in thinking about this. One is really like leaning into curricular materials in an intentional way, and I think, and not a commercial for anything, but the continuum of reading supports that New York City Public Schools is using, which includes like phonics for reading and rewards and Starry. There's also a program, Rewards Plus, which is content specific. And so it's like a reading support program that has embedded foundational literacy supports for students, but also includes history content or science content. And I've seen schools really effectively use that to support students in access. Like they're going to take the living environment regions, they're going to take the global history regions, because that's all we care about. Not me, not everyone, sorry. But curricula like that we can sort of defensively say to teachers, like, yeah, look, you're teaching them content, and also there are embedded literacy supports for students. And I think that when curriculum catches up to that, and when there's widespread adoption of it, I think that's going to really help students access like grade level content. The other thing that I would say and make a pitch for is, and I talk to principals about this a lot in school visits, is the idea of like targeted scaffolding for students rather than sort of scaffolding for everyone. Like I visit classes, and it's kind of like you go to Oprah's show and everyone gets a car. It's like everyone gets the handout that has the two easy steps to do the thing, and like understand where your students are and what they need in order to
Mm.
access something that is like rigorous and meaningful. And really often, unfortunately, I see like lowering the barrier to entry for everyone is an issue, A, and then B, lowering the like expectation on the top. And so then we're like shifting everything down. And so you don't need to demonstrate like a lot of literacy to access it, and you can't actually demonstrate deep understanding or comprehension. And so targeted scaffolding, but then like really purposeful tasks that kids are doing that require them to show their thinking and originality, and what sense they are making of what they're reading. I was at a school today where they're doing some work around project-based learning. They're calling them PBL experiences for kids, to try to get teachers to recognize that, like, over the course of time, you're building students' ability to be able to present a thing in a novel way, that it doesn't just happen like once or twice in a semester. And I think the more that we're able to think differently about how we assess kids and the kinds of tasks we provide them with, and then not make everything like the 4 steps to solve this equation and the 3 steps to write this essay. Some students need that to get started. Eventually, we want everyone to be able to do it without that. And so understanding what kids need and setting an expectation for their like demonstration of learning that is like real and meaningful, I think is going to help us get there, Ian.
Yeah, beautifully said. I think that's a perfect segue to opening this up to a bigger conversation. And let's see if we can just move right into the questions phase of things here. And I don't know why this is not advancing, but I might just actually go ahead and stop sharing altogether. Bring us back. So yeah, let's open this up to, we have a few minutes left. I would love hear some questions and comments from our fellow participants. So please jump right in, and we will continue this conversation for a few more minutes. So thank you all so much, and really appreciate the panel's responses. Marianne, Aaden, Christina really did a beautiful job of giving a very full, rounded view of all of these topics that we discussed here, interrelated topics. Yeah. Fantastic. Nikki, go right ahead.
Tell us about Readable English.
Readable English. Okay, so Readable English is a lot to say about Readable English. And Anna is here. She can talk about it as well. But essentially, it is derived out of Orton Gillingham originally. It was developed in California. And it's basically they've created 21 glyphs or diacritical marks that you teach the students, in addition to graphically showing syllable breaks, as well as graying out silent letters. So you see it in our slides, actually. In fact, if the slideshow would work properly right now, I'd put a word up for you. But essentially, in a nutshell, you take English words and you build a scaffold onto each word, where the word becomes almost like a visual image, where a student can see exactly what they need to pronounce, how they need to pronounce it, and what they don't need to pronounce. And as students develop that ability to quickly recognize that, you wean them off of it so that they're able to look at standard English spellings without being blocked and being overwhelmed with the cognitive load that occurs when you're trying to do three things at once just to figure out what the word says before you can even approach deriving any kind of meaningfulness out of what it's saying. So that's a very, very small nutshell. Anna, if you want to say some more, please jump in.
I did actually. I just wanted to call. We actually have Molly Druce on the call here as well. She's a senior literacy strategist here at Readable English. She might have something to add here, and particularly around one of the main questions we often get around Readable English is, when do students wean off the glyphs, and how can that be structured into an MTSS, and how do you know when students are no longer dependent on the glyphs? So Molly, I know you're on the call there. If you'd like to chime in and answer some question on that topic.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, good. All right. So yeah, to answer your question, just like what Iain said, Readable English is kind of an overlay. With OG for years, we have been asking kids to mark up words, right? That's part of the multisensory process. We do that during phonics instruction. Basically, what Readable English has done is they have kind of overlaid that into the actual word, but you're also learning the basic phonics for the upper grades 2 and beyond while you're doing that. And then the glyphs kind of wean away. And there's actually a lot of research back with Hebrew and Arabic, both have scripted systems that they actually use diacritical marks like glyphs when they're learning. And then those go away and they start to be able to read those words themselves. That's just how the languages work. So it's basically applying that to English. So it makes English very phonetic, like a one-to-one, this letter makes a sound. But when it comes to weaning off, what we've seen is that within a year of instruction, kids tend to rely less and less on the glyphs. So it's actually built in phases, and they actually specifically learn how to stop their reliance on them and how to monitor that. But it still has an assistive technology component for, kids with severe dyslexia. People are always like, well, when am I going to be cured? Well, the fact is dyslexia is a lifelong condition. I don't want to call it a disability because, as we all know, there are some pretty incredible dyslexic people out there. So I would say that usually within a year, but a lot of kids a lot earlier. It depends on how fast they're progressing through the program. Yeah, I think did I answer the question?
It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Molly. We have another question in here. I just one, Iain, I'll throw it to you, and you can kind of decide if one of the panelists is best suited to answer this question. How do we address the challenge of inconsistent attendance? The question is that frequently encountering intervention teachers who are frustrated that the students who need the most literacy support do not regularly attend programming.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that takes us right back to what Aaden was talking about with respect to culture in a school, and how do you build that culture to where attendance is less of an issue. You know, I myself have been in any number of schools where you have an intervention program in play that is making a difference for the students who are coming every day, but the students who are missing, you know, coming very erratically, maybe attending for a week and not attending for 2 days, so on and so forth, they're not seeing that growth because they're just not consistently there. So yeah, I think it's a culture question, but I'd love to hear what others have to share about that. Christina, you might be able to talk to this a little bit too. But yeah, how do we manage that participation component? That is, of course, absolutely necessary if any kind of learning of any kind is going to be successful.
Very important. Certainly, you know, I'll just share. I think in the adolescent literacy space, I feel like the more I learn, the less I know, right? Those are one of that question, particularly around attendance and around, you know, making allowances and programming to ensure that it's the best possible time in the day so that students are there, they're not running late, it's a persistent challenge that I face sometimes, many colleagues face. And, you know, just going right back to what was shared around culture is important. And you know, I find that parent collaboration and parent outreach, family outreach can also be another critical tool in the toolbox with regards to, you know, keeping families up to date about the importance of this class, letting them know that this is a class that is specifically designed to give them the support that they need. But it certainly can pose a challenge. And so, you know, I think incentivizing, I know there are some schools, they'll kick off the year with a celebration where everyone gets their classes revealed to them and there's a party, just things like that to help to build the culture so that kids, you know, over time feel like, you know, they might be like jumping for joy, but they don't hate it. They're not skipping. They're on time because there's a culture around it and the stigma is lowered as low as possible for high schoolers. So, but curious to hear what others have to say on that topic.
I think we're blessed in our situation because we're a private school that the kids want to be here. And when we have some, you know, there are times when kids are, you know, going through whatever they're going through that they'll not be present, but our attendance is you know, pretty good. But in those moments, you know, one of the wonderful things is that other students will text or connect with someone who's missing and saying, hey, you know, missed you at school today. So it's not just coming from the teacher, but coming from the peers. And that is the culture of the school, that as family, you know, we missed you and we want you to come back and to be here. And how can we help you do that? And then secondly, you know, always, you know, my motto has always been you start where kids are. So if they've been gone for 3 days or 15 or however long they are, on that day they come back, we go back to where we were, go back a few steps back. So we're just kind of reviewing, so to speak, or reminding them of where, you know, where we have been and where, you know, what successes they've had or what areas that we're working on, and then begin the process again. And just trying to stay in that really loving, positive mode that they're the most important person. You know, and if every student is the most important person to us, it does change lives and it changes direction over a period of time. Even for those with, you know, I've had kids that haven't been to school for a year or a year and a half before they've found their way to our school. So it's, you know, there's no magic answer. There's so many reasons why kids aren't in school, but to try to give them that opportunity and to remind them that they're part of a family, and that family loves them is probably the most important medicine we can give them to re-invite them back, and no shame about what day it is that they come back.
Beautiful.
A few quick things. If I could just add, like, program it during the school day. Don't, it's not an after school, it's not a before school, it's not during lunch. It's what you need. Everyone gets it. And not just students who need reading support. Everyone gets what they need, whatever it is. Reading, math, debate, literature circles, put it in the day so it's attendance to school. I think goal setting is really important. Communicating with students, both like where they're going, but also being able to show them how they've improved. And I think that some of those things are embedded in some of the curricula we use in the city. Like off the top of my head, Rewards has kids like tracking the words they read per minute as a measure of fluency. It's like kids love, and this isn't like gamified, using technology, but it's like kids like watching the scoreboard, right? And so if they see like here, I'm reading 15 words in 30 seconds now, but if I've seen growth, right? My goal is to be able to do better the next time. Like kids are going to show up. I think you need to make it like meaningful and accessible and not like extra. And I think unfortunately the system is set up so that it's like you need more, so you have to suffer for more school. And I would argue that if you need more, school needs to shift so it provides you what you need during the day, so you don't have to suffer through Saturday school and after school in order to catch up for the years that we haven't met your needs.
Yeah,
Yeah, I want to
absolutely.
just build on that. The amount that kids feel penalized for being in intervention, and as someone who has been a reading specialist for 15 years, the amount that happens, and then they come to me, and then I have to completely rebuild right there because they're
Yep.
coming to me and they're like, oh, you know,
Yeah.
this is a punishment. It's huge. I'm really happy to see someone in your office say that. That makes me very happy.
I'm not the only one. I'm just the only one here.
So true. And to your point, Aiden, too, I would just add, don't schedule the intervention for first period. Uh,
Or during
that's
PE.
yes,
Never
that's a
schedule it
big,
during PE.
yeah.
Yeah,
Seen that too many
or
times.
ninth period, and don't like hold kids' phones. Don't say we collect. You can't bring your phone in the building. We're gonna hold your phone until you stay for your reading class. Kids will skip an entire day of school
Yes.
rather than letting you hold their phone for them to take a ninth period reading class or extra support thing. Don't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it is 6 o'clock. I want to honor people's time. We have done this for an hour, and it's been a rich conversation, and it's been a lot to think about. So, what I'm going to put up one last slide here with some information on it. A great big thank you, of course, everybody. But to Marianne's point about family, interestingly enough, this pilot that Columbia is doing through the Center for Public Research and Leadership is actually focused on families and family engagement in literacy interventions, and how that can look and how that can play out, and what kind of structures you can design around engaging families in different types of educational contexts. In the support of adolescent literacy. So that's something we're exploring. Readable English is looking for partnerships in the New York area, and that doesn't have to be a school per se. It can be a community-based organization. Anybody working with literacy, with adolescents in some capacity, may be a really strong partner for us. So if you're interested in learning more about that, or even partnering with us, or you know someone who might be, reach out to me. I have my email right there. You can check out the Center for Public Research and Leadership at the link there as well. Would be happy to connect with you, set up a meeting, and discuss it further. But that being said, just again, thank you so much, Marianne. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Aaden. It's always fun to bring you into these things. Christina, you're in my heart. We will all three be talking soon enough as it is. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who participated. And I really, really appreciate your thoughtful engagement. And let's make this happen for young people. This is, I think, an inflection point in literacy. And we can really rethink how we teach human beings how to read, and what the value of that is fundamentally in a person's life. And I love to see the conversation moving in that much more holistic whole life direction. So again, thank you all so very much. And I'll see you on the other side. Yeah.